There are some watches that I really loved but never got around to buying. Not that everything needs to be bought, but sometimes you see a watch you like and then suddenly it's discontinued. That's what I wanted to dive into today. Relatively recently discontinued watches that were, at least according to me, really cool. Let's dive in. Before JLC had a corporate meltdown and decided that everything should cost more than $10,000, they were actually a lot of value for money. And they also had a really compelling entry-level watch that wasn't the Reverso. It was the Master Control Sector Dial. It was released in 2017. There was a time and date only version, there was a chronograph, and there was a geographic version. The time and date was around $5,700, which in 2017 wasn't cheap, but how cool was this watch? Today you've got Baltic and Furlan Mari and a lot of others doing cool sector dials, and they are a bit of a thing right now, but not JLC. They don't sell this watch anymore. It was only available for something like 2 years, which I think is a real shame for a real stunning, modern, but retro sector dial watch. I honestly think this watch would be a hit if they released it today. Rolex discontinued the Milgauss a year or so ago, and it's such a shame. Up until the discontinuation, Rolex only really had 2 tool-leaning watches left in their lineup. It was the Explorer 2 and the Milgauss. Everything else was reasonably shiny and dressy by then. But the Milgauss, which did have polished center links, was just because of its story and its intended use and the green crystal and the lightning hand, it was so much its own thing. And it was a nerd favorite, and the Z Blue was on my list of watches I really wanted to own. I mean, it had a blue dial, it had a green crystal, and it had lightning orange seconds hand. That's not very Rolex, and it's just what made it great. Fortunately, next year is the anniversary year for the Milgauss, so I'm hoping they bring it back. I think the Cartier Drive was the best Cartier that nobody ever wore. You never really know with Cartier if they'll bring something back, but the Drive was, I think, seen as an attempt to have a more contemporary and not quite as artsy and jewelry forward watch for men. In some ways, it was totally a Cartier with, Roman numerals and wavy dial and blued hands, but the case for a Cartier was actually relatively restrained. It wasn't pasha crazy, it wasn't dainty like a tank, and maybe that's what killed it, but I had it on my wrist so many times and I just never got around to pulling the trigger, which is a shame because it's a really cool watch. Now you've made it this far, that means you're most likely enjoying the video. You might as well pull the trigger and hit the like button. And if you're new, click subscribe. That way I also know that you're enjoying this kind of content, which guides me in my video making decisions. Thanks a ton. Tudor's best integrated bracelet watch was never the Royal. It was the North Flag. This was a 40mm brushed stainless steel case with a matte black dial, yellow seconds hand, and a power reserve indicator. These days, the vast majority of integrated bracelet watches are flashier and more suited to a boardroom than to the woods. But the North Flag was very much a tool watch. It was an integrated bracelet Tudor Ranger Explorer. It was a little bit thick because it was from a period where Tudor was still ironing out their manufacturing processes. The movement itself was nothing to write home about, but the watch itself had a ton of personality. And I think Tudor has very little left of that personality. The North Flag is to me something like the Scottish Highlands, where all the black bays are very Miami Beach, and especially the daring watches. The FXD has a little bit of the personality of the North Flag, but it really doesn't come close. It's a great watch. I get why they killed it, but I still think it's a shame. I think it was in 2019 that Seiko discontinued the SKX 007 and 009. The SKX 007 had a terrible movement, the bezel was only aligned when it was a full moon, and the bracelet was better suited as a percussion instrument than an actual bracelet. Today, you can get a Seiko 5 or an SRPD model that approximates these models, but I think the discontinuation was met with such a strong reaction because of how people interpreted the discontinuation. It wasn't so much the discontinuation itself, but it coincided with a period of Seiko both going premium in pricing on the one hand, and on the other hand launching more, fashion-forward watches that weren't really perceived as capable as real tool watches like the SKX. The SKX watches came much more across as real beaters. I might even say that the SKX was the quintessential beater watch, and Seiko 5, despite being more solid, just wasn't quite a beater anymore. Omega discontinued the Railmaster probably because it didn't sell, and I don't understand why. The denim Railmaster was badass. The black dial model was a legitimate alternative to a Rolex Explorer. The 1957 was pretty much Omega's answer to the question of beating an old serial number Explorer. There was also a silver dial that had its place as well. I don't quite know why it never caught on. Maybe it wasn't toolish enough. The denim NATO strap was a bit much. But again, Omega just has so many models that it's no wonder that some SKUs just disappear into obscurity. But you were paying a little bit over $4,000 for a really cool watch with a lot of tool vibe. I would definitely choose this one over an Explorer any day of the week. I'm probably in the minority there, but I stand by my statement. The steel Nautilus 5711 has to go on the list. Thierry Stern claimed that the 5711 in steel was increasing the risk of Patek becoming a one-watch brand, just like AP with the Royal Oak. So they discontinued the steel 5711. Since then, they've been consistently slimming down in both the Nautilus and the Equinox steel lineup. There's not a lot of steel models left. To some extent, I understand Thierry's rationale. Patek aren't a steel brand anymore, and steel is for the few who've spent a ton of cash on gold and platinum complication watches. But the new Cubitus is just such an inferior creation. I mean, it's not bad, but it's also nowhere near the Nautilus in terms of design. Now, will the steel Nautilus come back someday? I'm convinced it will. Maybe in 10, 15 years if Patek is briefly in trouble and needs something to kickstart interest in their brand. Or maybe it'll come back once in a while as a limited edition. But just like, every superhero ever, they rarely stay dead forever. One of my first grown-up watches was a Tag Heuer Link chronograph with a blue dial. These days, the Link bracelet is pretty much only to be found in watches targeted at women with the exception of like 2 caliber 5 models. I would argue that the Link bracelet is one of the best looking bracelets out there. It's not a 3-link, it's not a 5-link, it's not a Jubilee clone, it's not an Oyster clone. It's got a little bit of taper, and it had a look entirely its own. And I know for a fact that it wears really, really well. The shape of the links also give this watch and the bracelet a flow that I really, really like and few other bracelets actually achieve. It comes across as far more integrated in a way that traditional 3-link and 5-link bracelets just don't. So I would like them to bring it back on a chrono. Please. Okay, so this isn't really a recent discontinuation, and it's also a watch that we already know is coming back. It's the Universal Geneve Pole Router. And I've never gelled with vintage watches. I don't like other people's scratches, and I don't enjoy the temperamental nature of vintage movements. But the Pole Router dial has always been one I really liked. And when someone told me Genta had a hand in it, I was like, of course he did. It just has a lot of what I like about a lot of his other designs. And I'm not sure if I'm on board with a $15,000 entry-level time-only Pole Router, but the watches they've teased so far are really cool. And I, for one, am looking forward to seeing them in the real world again sometime. Probably next year, I think they're promising it. Last one. What other watches was I thinking of? I briefly thought the Breitling Aerospace Evo was discontinued, but it turns out it sort of isn't, apparently. Then there's the Tudor Big Block, which has been discontinued for a while, but I honestly don't really miss it that much. The Le Mans Daytona was also discontinued, which I think was a shame because I think it was a really good version of the current Daytona. But I mean, the Daytona is still there, so it's just a variant that I would never own anyway. But when I was reading up on the sector dial Jaeger-LeCoultre, I realized how much JLC have changed in the last 5 to 10 years. They used to have this watch, the Master Compressor Navy SEALs diving alarm. It's not some dainty, dull black dial Polaris. This was a wholly different beast. Yeah, it had a pedestrian movement, and I don't think it was an ideal Navy SEALs watch, but I liked it. Not very JLC in the way JLC present themselves today, but this particular watch I quite liked. Those were a couple of the watches that I wish were still around. They got discontinued for different reasons. Some didn't sell, some didn't fit in the lineup. The company went bankrupt, and in some cases they marked a shift for the company that made them. It's part of the circle of watch life. Some things disappear, other things make an entrance. Which of these watches would you like to see return? And are there other watches you'd like to see come back as well? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.